Today's pledge is by Emily Manderschild from Metropolitan State University of Denver.
Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Randall, please call the roll. Thank you. Nicely done.
Representatives Arndt, Becker J. J. Becker, Becker K. Beckman, Benavides, Bridges, Bridges,
Excused.
Buck, Buckner, Carver, Catlin, excused. Coleman, Covarrubias, Danielson,
Excused.
Escar, Everett, Exum, Foote, Garnett, Janal, Gray, Hamner, Hanson, Herod, Putin, Representative Danielson is present. Putin, Representative Bridges is present.
Excused.
Humphrey, Humphrey, oh, thank you. Jackson, Kennedy, Kraft Tharp, Landgraf, Lawrence, Lebsock, Lee, Leonard, Lewis, Liston, Lontine, Lundeen, McKean, McLaughlin, Melton, Michelson Janae, Mitch Bush, Navarro, Neville, Nordberg, Pabon,
I did. I didn't know you were sitting back there.
Pabon,
I see his big legs.
Pedersen, Rankin, Ransom, oh. Rosenthal, Sane, Salazar, Salazar,
Excused.
Sias, excused. Singer, Thurlow, Thurlow,
Excused.
Valdez, Van Winkle, Weissman, Willett, Williams, Wilson, Winter, Wist, Young. Madam Speaker.
Present.
Catlin, Putin, Salazar, Sias, and Thurlow. There's Representative Thurlow is present.
With 61 present and 4 excused, we have a quorum. Representative Weissman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is a pleasure to serve with you on this cool and gray October day, as also in the last sunny days of May.
Indeed, it's a pleasure to serve with you as well.
I move that the reading of the Journal of Monday, October 2nd, be dispensed with and approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk.
All right, members, you have heard the motion. All of those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed signify by saying no. The motion passes. Announcements and introductions. Assistant Majority Leader Garnett and Representative Nordberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, a lot of you weren't actually there last night to join us for the kickball game, but I wanted to thank all the members who did show up. It was so fun. It was a bipartisan gathering where we played kickball under the lights. It rained a little bit, but it wasn't that bad, and we raised money for a good cause. So again, I wanted to thank Representative Nordberg for putting it together and thank all the members who came out and all the members who donated who weren't able to come out. So we all gave to a good cause. So thank you. And you can still give today.
Representative Nordberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll just briefly echo those remarks. It was horrible weather conditions, which almost added to the fun of the evening. So for those of you who did attend, thank you. For those, again, who contributed and could not attend, thank you. If you would like to contribute today, we are going to email out a link for the Red Cross for you to donate to. So please consider doing so. And thanks again for your time.
Further announcements or introductions? Representative Hamner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good morning, colleagues. And some people call weather bad, but up in the mountains, we call all weather good. And we're just awaiting the news about A Basin opening, so let's keep our fingers crossed. But actually, members, you probably won't believe this, but we have another birthday on the floor today. Yesterday, it was Representative Lundeen. Today, it's Representative Lontine. Wow. So I need to call down the Capitol Choir to wish Representative Lontine a one. Wow, the Capitol Choir just grew. Huge. And we do take new members. We take anyone. And as you can see and hear. So please join us in wishing Representative Lontine a very happy birthday. Lontine. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Representative Lontine. Happy birthday to you.
Any further announcements or introductions? Representative Kennedy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, you should have all received an email from me earlier this morning, but coming up next week, there's an event that I thought some of you might be interested in. The 2017 Solar Decathlon put on by the U.S. Department of Energy is in Denver this year, and I've arranged for a day for a special tour for any legislators who are interested. So if you are interested, it's on Thursday, October 12th from 3 to 5, and they'll be giving us a tour of all the solar homes out there. So either reply to my email or let me know if you're interested in coming. Thanks.
Representative Kraft-Tharp.
Thank you. I want to let everyone know about 2 upcoming meetings this next month. First, at the end of the month, October 31st, the Joint Budget Committee, the CDC, and the Audit Committee will be meeting with the State Fair folks to come up with a plan for sustainability for the State Fair. So really want to encourage people, invite you, be part of a planning process that really will help to be able to develop something positive and something sustainable. The second second is on November 1st is the last meeting for this year, the streamlining sales tax meeting. We will be talking about a draft bill around streamlining the remittal of our sales tax process. That meeting is in 271 and will be probably from about 9 o'clock till 1 o'clock. So I want to invite people to come participate in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Kraftart. And I'm sure our legislators from Southern Colorado will be good stakeholders in the conversation about the Colorado State Fair. Are there any further announcements or introductions? Representative Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good morning, everyone. On October 21st, which is a Saturday, we're having an Eastern Colorado tour for Lincoln, Crowley, Otero, and Los Animas counties, and you'll be getting it in your inbox here momentarily and a copy on your desk. So those of you that can travel to Eastern Colorado that day and join us, we'd love to have you. Thank you.
Representative Hamner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm sorry, no more birthdays that I know of today or yesterday. But I just, it was brought to my attention that there's an omission on today's calendar, and I'm just announcing that the Joint Budget Committee will be meeting upon adjournment today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative McKean.
Thank you, Madam
The
Speaker.
beer
Pleasure
threw
working
me
with
there
you.
for a minute.
Who here likes beer? Only 1, 2, 3. Beer? Beer, anybody? Beer? Who likes beer? Get your hands in the air. So does anybody realize that this week is the Great American Beer Fest? We realize this? Do you also realize, Representative Garnett? Come here. I hate to interrupt your deep conversation in the back.
You could be a little more polite about it.
I know, I really could. Did we make beer this year?
We did make beer. Matt Gray was there.
Matt Gray was there. We had Representative Winter was there. We had Representative Hansen was there. We made beer. What kind of beer did we make?
We made an IPA.
Did we make a winning beer?
Yeah, so the Senate currently holds the trophy. So you guys, do we know what Representative McKean's talking about?
No, that's why I'm introducing it this way. Now you have their attention. They weren't listening to you before.
I wasn't talking.
I know.
So what are we doing right now?
Okay. So what you
is
need to
going
know
on down
is
there?
that the House of Representatives made a beer in competition with the Senate called Hopping the Vote, and people will be able to vote on this beer at the Great American Beer Fest, correct?
That's exactly right. And I just want you guys to know that through the work of all of your hardworking members at the brewery, we are going to bring the trophy home because we're going to get more votes at the Great American Beer Fest than the beer that the Senate made. And we're going to make all of you guys proud. And Representative McKean actually was the most knowledgeable on making beer at the brewery. And so I'm proud to say that I'm confident we're going to go in with the best beer and we're going to win.
We are going to win. Absolutely. Round of applause, please. Thank you. So here's the other piece of this. You can come pour our beer at the Great American Beer Fest. So if you would like to come down and do that, you need to come see one of the two of us, and we'll hook you up. We're going to be pouring beer Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday afternoon. Big opportunity to come down and get to see the whole thing going on, and really, what did I say? Wrest victory from the cold, dead hands of the Senate? I believe those were the words.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Gray.
One other important note is that our beer was in fact brewed at Four Noses Brewing in Broomfield, and so as we all know, Broomfield does actually create the most delicious beer in the state, so we're pretty much a lock, so you should come and enjoy it.
All right. Any further announcements or introductions? Going once, going twice. All right. Seeing no further announcements or introductions, the next item of business is third reading of bills. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1001.
House Bill 17B-1001 by Representative Barry Kakao, Senator Donovan, concerning clarification of the retail marijuana sales, subject to sales taxes levied by certain limited purpose governmental entities.
Assistant Majority Leader Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 17B-1001 on third reading and final passage.
The motion before us is a passage of HB 1001 on third reading and final passage. There is some discussion, it looks like. Representative Weissman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I think a feeling settling over the building this morning that the die may be cast on this special session, but nonetheless I want to say a few things for the record. And the first is that the issue that we are here to address is already having real consequences. It is not academic, it is not just a bunch of numbers. I personally know somebody, a friend of a friend who has been a friend of me as well, who worked the last day of his job last week at one of the organizations funded in part by SCFD. He was told explicitly that the loss of funding pursuant to the statutory glitch was one of the reasons why. And I would venture to say, if we think through who we all know, I may not be the only one who knows somebody in that situation. The second is that, as many folks here know, reductions have been proposed to our line service, which is something that greatly impacts my district and other districts in Aurora and all over the East Metro area. Do I know with certainty that all of that cause is the reduction in funding that RTD is experiencing? No, I don't. I think there are a lot of variables there. But it doesn't help. All other things equal, losing more than $500,000 a month does not help. And I thought yesterday about other RTD service that my district relies on, the A-Line, the 15 bus, the 153 bus, the 169 bus, just to name a few of them. And as the cumulative loss grows, they too may be impacted. Finance Committee was told yesterday that the package of service reductions currently being contemplated by RTD amounts to about $4 million annual savings. That is two-thirds, only two-thirds of what we are now talking about here. So I fear greater cuts. Second, there is a broad base of support within and without this building for this simple fix. On the sheet that we got, I see business organizations, I see my chamber, I see the Denver Chamber, I see the Competitive Council, I see the South Metro Chamber, I see the North Metro Chamber. I see mayors of cities we might call conservative leaning, like Greenwood Village. I see mayors of cities we might call progressive leaning, like Boulder. I see mayors of cities that are right about in the middle, like my city, Aurora. The third thing I want to emphasize, and it's been emphasized before, so I'll be brief, is that the underlying issue here was really quite unintentional. And I like to put it this way. For all of us who in May voted for this bill, and there were 49 of us, and I admire the courage of everyone who did, if you voted for this bill, for whatever your reason to do so was, it was not to remove from the tax base of special districts the ability to collect voter-approved tax on recreational marijuana. And if you voted against this bill back in May, whatever your reason was to do so, I just about guarantee the reason was not because you wanted to preserve the presence of recreational marijuana in the tax base for these districts. That issue was simply not on the table. We did not discuss it. We did discuss the 2.9% rate for the state. We certainly discussed that. We did not discuss the issue of impacting Title 32 districts and other districts. Fourth issue, Tabor. I'm not going to say much about that. That's what this binder is for. Don't worry, I'm not going to read it all. I try not to reach conclusions lightly in this building on any issue before us, and least of all when an issue is the sole issue before us in a special session into which we have been called. and least of all when it is a constitutional issue. So I've spent a lot of the last week reading a lot of Tabor case law. And as Finance Committee heard yesterday, there are a few close questions in Tabor case law, but I believe the weight of authority is squarely on the side of empowering the legislature to correct this glitch. And I think more importantly, Section 7 of Tabor specifically allows collection and retention of revenue if approved by the voters. And I just want to state for the record the numerous times in which voters of both of the two districts that are most impacted here have been asked at the ballot and have approved exactly that type of proposition. In 1973, the language before the voters of RTD concerned a tax upon every taxable transaction, quote, that was approved. 1995, referendum 4B, the language was collect, retain, and expend all revenues which might otherwise be subject to refund, approved by 53.2%. 1999, referendum 4A, collect, retain, and expend all revenue from any source as a voter-approved revenue change, approved 65.6%. 2004, referendum 4A, proceeds being exempt from revenue and spending restrictions until such time as all debt is repaid, and it's not yet, approved 57.9%. Scientific and Cultural Facilities District, 1988, receive proceeds from 1/10 cent sales tax, approved 74.5%. 1994, Amendment 400, concerning taxes currently levied and collected, were the magic words, 57%. 1995, referendum 4A, collect, retain, and spend all revenue generated by such tax in excess of limitations, 58.1%. 2004, authorizing the district to continue to collect, retain, and spend all revenue generated, 65.2%. And just last November, 2016, authorizing the district to collect, retain, and spend all revenue generated by such tax in excess of the limitation provided, 62.9%. I think most of those numbers constitute a blowout in the way that a lot of us are used to thinking about elections. Some other revealing data, I think, is that in 2012, when the question of legalizing recreational marijuana was put before the voters, it was approved statewide by 53.5%. The actual tax, AA, in 2013, 65.3%. And the clarification of that tax, BB, in 2015, 69.4%. Now, it's a fair point that these statewide measures do not bear directly on the legalities under Tabor of the special districts, but I think they bespeak the willingness of voters around our state to assess a sales tax on recreational marijuana. That was the whole premise of 64 and continues to be that premise. And it is not free, it is not cheap to conduct these elections. I requested data from the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District, and the election that they conducted in the 7 counties in the metro area in 2016 cost $911,000. Now, they had to do it because they have to go back to the ballot every now and then. That's how it works. But that's that much less money that can go to the Bluff Lake Nature Center on the border of Denver and Aurora, or the Aurora Symphony, or the zoo, or any other recipient of SCFD funds. But I think last, and what weighs on me most heavily about this issue, notwithstanding it as having immediate and significant consequences, is that in the grand scheme of things that we deal with here, consequential though this issue is, it is actually somewhat modest in its scope and within our reach. When floods gouge out gullies in Boulder County as they did in 2013, we can't fix the damage done in one bill. When wildfire burns in Black Forest, we can't fix the damage done in one bill. When droughts demolish crops or blizzards batter livestock in rural Colorado and impact the livelihood of farmers and ranchers, we can't fix all of that in one bill. When we come down here, we face issues as vast as educating a generation, achieving affordable housing, providing health care, generating and using energy in a responsible way, issues of crime and punishment, mental health, housing the homeless, healing the sick, funding and underfunded transportation infrastructure, rolling out broadband to rural communities, and a lot more. Which is to say, most of the issues that we grapple with when we do this job are bigger than we can truly address in a career, certainly bigger than we can address in a session, and very certainly bigger than in a single bill, most of those issues. But of course we try, because we must try, because we were elected to try. That is why we are here. And try we did in 2017 Senate Bill 267 to address a number of these issues, particularly as they bear on rural Colorado.
Representative Weissman, you have 20 seconds.
Thank you. Including the availability of health care, education, and transportation. But we made a mistake, and we're here to fix it. And unlike some of these other vast issues, we can fix it. We were elected to solve problems. Regardless of our party, regardless of our ideology, regardless of our district, we were elected to solve problems. We can solve this problem. There is no legal impediment to our doing so. And I really greatly hope that we all do. Thank you.
Representative Leonard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There are some that believe that our special session today was a waste of time and a waste of money. I'm not one of those. I believe that it was an excellent use of time and money, because what the debate does on this important subject is clarify the issues. And any good debate, especially with an esteemed body like this, with wide backgrounds, lots of experience, and excellent form in arguing and stating the facts, it got to show our taxpayers and our citizens and our residents and our constituents exactly what the issue was. We've been getting sound bites from the media for quite a while, and this helped frame the issue a lot more clearly. So when we came into this session, we got to hear words like Constitution and tax increases, things we hadn't heard before, and they mattered. They matter to our constituents, and they mattered to us making the debate. But here's what else our constituents and voters got to hear. They got to hear and see special interest groups come down to the Capitol like pigeons coming to crumbs, to pick crumbs of money to make sure that their spigots not only stayed on, but weren't even touched. No tax cuts, no decreases in revenue. And when I say crumbs, I mean crumbs, like for RTD. The loss of revenue, being able to get 2.9% from just marijuana in just their districts, amounted to, in their $1.257 billion annual budget, 0.0048. So that means that half of a 1% was so important to them that they had to send troops down to be able to do it. That decrease could not be made up with efficiencies. That's how focused they were, and the taxpayers got to see that. They also got to see us as legislators, that when these tax cuts came, this 0.0048 came, that it was such an anomaly. It was so anathema for politicians to actually cut a budget that it needed to be fixed. It was inadvertent. It was accidental. It was a glitch. It had to get fixed because it was inadvertent. We as politicians would never, trust me, never purposefully cut a budget by 0.0048. So whatever it takes, regardless of a constitutional amendment clearly in Article 10, we have got to come back in the special session and fix this. And the more the taxpayers heard glitches and fixes, the more it's solidified in them that the only way to control politicians and have any fiscal responsibility is by doing it inside the Constitution. That's what they heard. Let me tell you also what the taxpayers heard. They heard their governor rely more on his lawyers to determine a legislative issue than he discussed it with their legislators. They also got to see their governor ask for the payment of the special session to be made by those districts who profited by the legislation specific in the call. We heard where I come from, we make a mistake, we fix it. But what we all know is that where we come from, when we swear an oath to the Constitution, by God, we uphold it. And that is the point of this special session, and I think that point has been very well made. And I think it was very worthwhile to have this. It came as personal sacrifice to all of us, but it was well worth it. And I thank the governor for his call, and I thank us for the opportunity to be able to talk directly to our constituents and our voters about exactly what the issue is and what principles we uphold. Thank you.
Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good morning. This is a proclamation for the call. I would ask that it be posted, that the governor sent out. The proclamation, a very, very narrowly defined call concerning the clarification of statutory provisions enacted in Senate Bill 17267 to codify that retail marijuana sales are subject to sales tax levied by certain special districts and other limited purpose government entities. I worked very hard trying to get some of my creative ideas under the call language and was unable to. The Constitution requires that the state of Colorado to secure voter approval in advance for any new tax rate increase or tax policy change directly causing a net revenue gain. 267, what it actually did was it expired a taxing authority. To reinstitute these taxing authorities is a tax policy change and will increase taxes. We cannot set that precedence. I took an oath to uphold the Constitution, and what's really frustrating to me is that there were other ways besides this narrow call to fix the issue. Of course, some would say you'd have to go back to the voters, but there were ways that we could backfill these districts easily. Because 267 brought in substantial increases in marijuana money. For the special sales tax that is uncommitted, for 17 and 18, or 18 and 19, it's about $25 million. $25 million. Those amounts are significantly greater than the anticipated revenue loss to the affected state districts as a result of this retail marijuana exemption. And those numbers come from the person who did the drafting of 267. This call was intentionally written to be on the edge of the Constitution and the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. And it magnifies the question, do we really need to follow the Constitution? Or can we just, for convenience sake, ignore the clear language? In January, we'll be able to have this discussion again. I am hoping that we can discuss the backfilling of these special districts out of the marijuana money, the sales tax that was increased. That would be a way that we could solve the problem. It's a very small amount of money for the amount of money that we're taking in on marijuana. It could solve the problem without violating the very clear language of the Constitution and setting a precedent that will have rippling impacts across the state of Colorado.
Representative Bowman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I wanted to address a couple of points that happened over the course of 3 hours yesterday in the House Finance Committee. We had numbers of witnesses who came and testified, of course, about the needs of those who use services like Accessoride, those who need special accommodations for transportation that can only be provided by a system that we've created called RTD. We talked about cultural programming, and we talked about the needs of many of our constituents who want to participate in those types of events, but can't afford to do so when the Scientific Cultural Facilities District was created to manage that situation. And we had a very, very substantive conversation about the impacts of these dollars and cents that would be lost if we did not approve the bill in front of us today. But what struck me the most about that conversation was that that was the first time that we had had that conversation in the House Finance Committee. The first time that we had substantively addressed the issues that were before us. And what I thought about was, you know, we're the House Finance Committee. Our job is to dot every I and cross every T to make sure every comma and period and every financial and fiscal impact in the state of Colorado is understood by us. That's our job, that's our role, and that's what we've done very diligently over the course of this last session, including, I would add, when we discussed and debated Senate Bill 267. We had hours and hours of debate, hours and hours of discussion, but we never discussed the impacts to the cultural facilities by removing this tax. We never discussed the impacts to our RTD users and constituents by removing this ability to collect this tax. And I, as the chair of the Finance Committee, know this committee very well. We've spent hundreds of hours together. And if there's anyone who is diligent and thoughtful about these issues, it is the Finance Committee. And so I recognize that as the chair of the Finance Committee, maybe I have an extra responsibility to know and to make sure that Senate Bill 267 did everything we thought it did. But I failed in that responsibility. And so I thought, well, I need to take and accept that responsibility here in this body. But as part of that conversation yesterday, the special districts came and testified and said, normally in this process, when our special district is going to be impacted, we are allowed to comment on the fiscal note of the bill. We were never asked. RTD similarly said, when we are going to be impacted by a piece of legislation, we are asked. They were never asked. And so after those discussions and after those conversations, it appeared to me that we didn't miss this because we weren't smart enough. We didn't miss this because we weren't working hard enough. We didn't miss this because we weren't diligent enough. We missed this because we're human and we're imperfect and we made a mistake. Not just one of us or 100 of us, but thousands of us. None of us caught this on the second floor, on the first floor. And so when you make that mistake, as we did collectively, we must remedy that mistake. And that's what this bill does. Now, when I asked that question, because ultimately we're the ones who passed the bill that made this change, when I asked the question of those constituents who will be affected, how will you explain either a reduction in services or less opportunity for kids or less cultural events? How will you explain that? And their answer was, we will be transparent about what happened. The legislature no longer allows us to collect this tax, therefore we don't have as much in our budget. When that happens, that impacts all of us. Every single one of us is the legislature. Every single one of us is the law. And people will now look to us for either blame or willingness to solve a problem. And that's what the purpose of this special session is and was, to solve a problem or not, but it is squarely in our power to do so. And it is often easy to rely on things like the Constitution that say literally we cannot do what we want to do. But when we take an oath to the Constitution, we don't take an oath to an individual provision in the Constitution. We take an oath to the entire idea of the Constitution. More than just the legislative or the judicial or the executive pieces, we accept all of it. And in doing so, we accept the premise that we have more than just the plain language of the Constitution to guide us. We have many, many court decisions that allow us to do what we're doing today. And so you can decide whether you rely on the entirety of the Constitution, including all the pieces that say the judiciary has the power to tell us also how to do our job and interpret the language of that, or you can say we have to remain strict interpreters of the plain language of the Constitution. But knowing what's in the balance here, knowing what we've done as diligent as we might over the course of the last several months to figure this out, we've made it and accepted our mistake. And the Constitution, frankly, doesn't have a remedy if the legislature makes a mistake. There's no guidance other than the previous judicial opinions that are all about mistakes. And we had a fabulous law professor, my law professor, the Speaker's law professor in law school, who taught us about and reminded us about the many mistakes that the legislature had made over the course of many years interpreting and dealing with Tabor, and how the court said, we must avoid an absurd result when we look at constitutional provisions. And so we're going to allow the legislature, oftentimes when a mistake is made, to remedy that mistake. That's what we're doing here today. So we should avoid an absurd result. We should avoid an absurd result of having 100 of us gathered in this place, able to develop and have a solution and fail to pass it. We should avoid the absurd result of having thousands of riders on our transportation systems who need help as special assistance, accessoride from getting that service. We should avoid the absurd result of having our cultural institutions serve less and our children less. And so that's the question before us is, can we avoid that absurd result? Can we remedy that mistake? And should we do it? And my answer is yes. And this is that bill, and thank you, Madam Majority Leader, for bringing it.
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for this opportunity to address the body about House Bill 1001. I'm here today to support this bill because right there we see an animal that benefits from the taxes from SCFD. SCFD is the Science and Cultural Facilities District. How could you refuse a face like that? There are two of those very cute baby red pandas that were just born at the Denver Zoo. And that is the face that I want you to remember when this bill, unfortunately, as was mentioned earlier, it sounds like it's going to go down. Maybe not in this chamber, and perhaps maybe we can send the Senate, the lower chamber, a message and say, hey, you know, well, let's all unify together, Republicans, Democrats, all of us, 62-0, Send them a message. Let's help the red pandas at the Denver Zoo. Now, I think that sounds funny, and I get that. But let's say something that's not funny. $600,000 of funding for the SCFD will be cut this year alone. $742,000 next year. $803,000 the following year. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money for the Denver Zoo, for 306 organizations that benefit from SCFD funding. And maybe this was mentioned in committee, and maybe it wasn't. I wasn't in committee on yesterday morning. I was teaching my students, so sorry I was a little bit late. But let me tell you a few organizations that may be cut because this body, the legislature, sounds like we won't be able to agree in order to get the funding to these organizations that need it. Third Law Dance Theater, 7 Dancers, A Child's Song. Sounds like a children's organization. So here we are. We're not funding the children like we should. We always talk in this building, oh, let's fund the children. Well, here's our opportunity to do so. Adams County Historical Society. Some of you may represent Adams County. Arapahoe Philharmonic. Some of you may represent Arapahoe County. Art as Action, Art from Actions, and it goes on and on. Arvada, Center for the Arts and Humanities, Arvada Corral Company. Bluff Lake Nature Center. I could go on and on and on, but I only have, what, now 8 minutes left.
6 minutes and 30 seconds.
Thank you. All right, so next slide. Maybe some of you don't know this system very well because you're not from the metro area. That's the current light rail line for RTD. As you see, it doesn't just go to my district, which is southeast Denver. If you see the lower right, and then it kind of goes off into a V. That's my district. If we do not pass this bill, my district's RTD service will be cut. RTD has already said that the R line that goes from where the lower, where the red part is, all the way up to the blue line, the A line is what they call it, that's going to be cut. That's in my district. Those are my riders who may have their service cut. Now, let me tell you about the riders who actually go on that. Now, some of you may not know what RTD stands for. The R stands for Republican, and the D stands for Democrat, and the T stands for transportation. So RTD is transporting both R's and D's. So it doesn't care what party you are, and it doesn't care how much money you make. It transports everyone. However, 42% of all riders are under $35,000 a year in income. So we keep talking in this building, how do we help the people who are trying to help themselves? And there's one thing I always hear, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, RTD is trying to help them do that. And we are hurting those people. We are hurting people who are trying to get to work. We're hurting the homeless who take the bus or the light rail. We're hurting people who are trying to get to that Broncos game. We're hurting kids who are trying to maybe visit grandma. So it is unconscionable that we do not pass this bill in the House and the Senate. But this doesn't just impact the metro area. And I know there are some other speakers who are going to talk about that, but I want to mention Montezuma County. No, actually, let me mention Colorado Springs, the Pikes Peak RTA. The Pikes Peak RTA also funds, and I'm not from Colorado Springs, so bear with me while I read off some of these projects that could get cut. Not in my district, but I'm advocating for somewhere outside my district here, forgive me, because I don't hear an advocacy for the Austin Bluffs corridor, Nevada to Academy, Barnes to Old Farm, on-street bikeway improvements, signal improvements, roadway safety and traffic operations, Fillmore Street corridor, Woodman Road corridor improvement project, Vincent Drive. You get the picture. This bill is legal, it is constitutional. We have heard about the fact that it is fine to fix the mistake in the method that was prescribed in this bill. So that's not the problem. This thing is totally legal. And why we don't pass it is beyond me. I've also heard from arguments yesterday, and even some today, well, we can't pass this bill for a variety of reasons. Well, I think that sounds a whole like we could be hearing those arguments in January, too. I had heard about there was even a draft of this bill, this type of bill to fix this, that was circulated even before the special session was called. So obviously we were planning on fixing it, but now it sounds like we're not, even in January. And if we're not going to fix it in January, these cuts are permanent. How dare we go against the will of the voters who approved these taxes? How dare we go against the will of the voters? They sent us here to do their will, and we're going against their will. And that's what I fear. I hope that we're going to hear some speakers say, oh no, this just for this special session, we're voting no. I hope somebody's going to come up and say, no, 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 don't worry. We'll think about it, maybe for January. But I haven't heard that. All I heard was, this is permanent. And that, to me, is unconscionable. So members, let's send a unanimous message to the Senate. Let's wake them up from their sleep. Let's tell them, hey, the House has said you must pass this bill to help the furry little creatures at the Denver Zoo, to help the people trying to get to work, not just in the metro area, but around the state. Let's pass this bill unanimously. Thank you, members.
Representative Thurlow.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. And I will be brief, as I always am. I want to first, I think I owe an apology to the Republican caucus. I did not show up to play kickball yesterday. I should have, Representative Nordberg. I have no excuse whatsoever. It was raining outside. I was in a warm, cozy place. Maybe next year. I'm going to vote yes on this bill. Probably won't be too surprising to most of you. I don't think I owe an apology, but I think I owe an explanation sometimes for why I take a position that maybe some of you don't agree with. And so I wanted to just say very simply, you know, I had some experience with Tabor last year. I ran a very good bill, 1187, that most of you didn't vote for either, but it was a good idea. Here's what I found when I traveled my district. I got a lot of pushback over here. But when I went home, and I actually had 3 town hall meetings during the course of the session and then after the session, and got pretty good attendance, because when you advertise that Tabor's the subject, people turn out. People like Tabor, but here's what they like, and I've talked to so many people in my district and in other places, and here's what they like, and here's how they understand it. They want to vote, if we are going to increase their tax rates, they want us to tell them why and justify it, and they want to vote on tax increases, tax rate increases. But I did not ever have one town hall meeting where I got up and somebody quoted to me the Mesa County decision that allows for whatever the Mesa County decision allows, or this Supreme Court decision or that Supreme Court decision. And that's what I would just ask you here to think about, is we let this, and I have the greatest respect for lawyers. They're smart and we need them at certain times in our lives to go and do a job for us. But when we get into a legislative argument like this, and the argument then starts to turn on how many lawyers can dance on the head of a pin, the public, I don't think, cares about that. What the public sees and what I see is we cut not our own budget, we cut somebody else's budget. If it was our own budget, maybe it would be a different issue. But we cut inadvertently somebody else's budget. And we can fix it. We've got enough lawyers on one side to say we can fix it, and I know there'll be lawyers on the other side to say we can't. But we've got enough lawyers to carry that debate, I think. So just in the rational way that the ordinary person thinks, we made a mistake. It was a mistake that affects someone else's budget. We can fix it here. Whether that's the right way to do it, I don't know. I could argue that we shouldn't have. We should have waited till the general session. You can make that argument, but hey, we're here. We've spent the money. I think we should just go ahead and fix it. I'm going to vote yes.
Representative Hamner and Representative McLaughlin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And colleagues, we've heard a lot this morning about the impact on the Front Range and the Denver metro area, and we've even heard new definitions of acronyms for RTD. But I want to tell you, in Gunnison County, the R stands for rural. It's the Rural Transportation Authority, and this issue was brought to our attention, to Representative McLaughlin and I, who share Gunnison County, and also Senator Donovan, who's a Senate sponsor on this bill, back in August from one of the county commissioners there, John Messner. And when he first emailed us with this issue, I thought, what? We did what? And really could not believe that this had happened. So tried to do a little bit of research into the problem at that time to see if there was anything the Budget Committee could do with our special powers outside of session, and discovered our powers weren't quite strong enough to even deal with this issue. But we've heard about, the impact in the Denver area, and maybe, we've heard comments about the small percentage of a large budget, but let me give you a real number here. In Gunnison County, the impact is expected to be about $60,000 less in 2018 than what their voters approved and wanted to spend. And the impact they anticipate is about a 23% reduction in senior transportation services. So the question I ask myself is, why would the state restrict the ability of Gunnison County to provide services, transportation services, to their seniors? It's what they wanted, it's what their voters approved, and the state is saying, no, we're not going to let you spend that money. We're not going to let you raise the revenue that you approved as a community and as a county. The answer to me is that that is wrong. That was not the intention of Senate Bill 267. It was a mistake. We're here. We have the opportunity to fix the problem. I ask for a yes vote on this bill.
Representative McLaughlin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I, too, get to represent Gunnison County, and they did a budget this year, and because that's what they're supposed to do, and they have this money in there, and suddenly, I guess people decide to take that budget money away from them. It's huge. It's a huge amount. A lot of you have been to rural Colorado. Many of you have not been. To lose $48,000, $60,000 out of a rural county is enormous. It is not that you can just go and get a bus somewhere or walk somewhere. These people are so dependent on transportation. We have a very large elderly population, a very large poor population there. And this will really, really hurt Gunnison County. And this is only one of the rural counties it's helping. So as a rural advocate, you got to be really careful who you're voting against. Maybe your bus line isn't coming on time in Denver, and that's a really good reason to get rid of RTD for you. But it really hurts everybody. This is about people. It shouldn't be about politics. This is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is about people, and we've got to be very conscious of that. Thank you.
Representative Liston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I wasn't going to speak, but my good colleague, Representative Rosenthal, where are you, Representative Rosenthal? There you are. Nice to see you. He brought up the Pikes Peak RTA, and I've stood up here many a time and spoken about our fine RTA, Pikes Peak RTA, and since Representative Rosenthal brought it up, about the various projects, I felt compelled to come down and just talk about it a little bit. Representative, with all due respect, he spoke about the projects in the Pikes Peak RTA, the Fillmore and Austin Bluffs and Vincent's and all of those projects, those fine projects that you mentioned. Those are all right in the middle of my district. They run right through the middle of my district. I drive them almost every day, coming and going, so I know them extremely well. But the reality is, the truth is, quite frankly, good colleagues, is the Pikes Peak RTA is doing so well because we have such a great economy in Colorado Springs that we have excess revenues with the Pikes Peak RTA. So those projects will be done. They will not be cut. The Pikes Peak RTA has, I don't want to say more money than they know what to do with, because quite frankly, they would probably disagree with that. But because we have such a robust economy, those various projects, and quite frankly, some others throughout the entire RTA district in the Pikes Peak region will be funded. So there will not be cuts. And as to the various other projects that are being talked about here, whether they'll be cut or not, I'm here to say, I guess I'm the eternal optimist. The world is not going to come to an end if we don't pass this bill. I believe that the good people of all of these various districts, do you realize how many special districts? I learned this just yesterday. Do you realize how many special districts are in Colorado? I posed that question to a colleague of mine, and it's not 100, it's not 200, it's not 500, it's not 1,000, it's not even 2,000. It's 2,600 special districts. Quite frankly, I was very surprised at that. Now, some of these districts are large and small and so forth, but colleagues, the world is not going to end if we don't pass this. There's a lot of good people. Part of it is just having to maybe tighten our belt, to use that old adage, just not even a notch, not even a half a notch, not even a quarter of a notch, just maybe, just don't eat as much or spend as much, because these projects will ultimately be funded. Maybe they won't be all funded this year, but the world isn't going to come to an end. The sun's going to come up tomorrow and the next day and the next day. These various special districts will learn, money is very fungible, and a lot of these districts, probably even like the RTD, we're all the beneficiaries of a good, robust economy, and they're getting more money than they budgeted for. So these projects will indeed be funded, especially in the Pikes Peak RTA. I'm glad that they are, and that part of the reason, as we all know, that the RTA, or at least the Pikes Peak RTA, and probably many of the others, have been so successful, is they do prioritize their projects. They certainly do in the Pikes Peak RTA, and if they can't quite make their list per se by prioritizing the list, that's part of the reason why they've been so successful. They may have to delay it for 6 months or a year, but they do ultimately get done. So I'm here to tell you, as the eternal optimist, having lived in Colorado for 50 years, I've seen good times, I've seen bad times. We will get through this so-called crisis. We'll get through it just fine. And so the world isn't going to end whether we pass this or not. And I'm glad we have the RTA, and I'm glad that Representative Rosenthal brought that up.
But I wanted to assure you that the world is not going to crumble in the end. Thank you very much.
Representative Singh.
Pause for a minute for short people here. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I've heard over and over the last couple days that some of this building know what taxpayers want. But the plain language of our Constitution says you still have to ask them. And they like to be asked, not just in the town hall, but on the ballot. I think this vote today will make it very evident that a tax decrease is a problem for some, that a tax decrease is a mistake. As Representative Leonard pointed out, this special session highlights how important TABOR really is, because this body would never voluntarily cut 0.0048% of the budget, but instead would rather set a very dangerous precedent by courting a pay-to-play special session, rather than let voters keep 0.0048% of their money. Special session for special districts speaks volumes about special interests and where taxpayers stand in relation. Urge a no vote on this bill.
Representative Mitch Bush.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, colleagues, for a very robust discussion. I represent rural Western Slope, Colorado. I've lived in rural Western Slope, Colorado for over 40 years. The people and the groups who will be most hurt by a no vote on this bill are from rural Western Colorado. As I did yesterday, I would draw your attention to the fiscal note. This is not a tax increase. A yes vote on this bill is not a tax increase. If you carefully looked at this, you would see that the data come from taxes that have already been paid. Let's talk about special districts. We, the legislators, do not have the power to dictate to special districts what their budgets look like. They are special districts, they are local. We talk a lot in this chamber about local control and how much we support it. A no vote on this bill is a vote against local control. It is a slap in the face of the people who, after a hard day at work, go to their special district meetings, their board meetings, and work very diligently on their budgets. And yes, as Representative Liston said, some of them are doing quite well. The ones on the Western Slope are not. Let's talk about who they serve and who will be hurt, because that's what a no vote on this bill really is. Who gets hurt? There are no winners here with a no vote, but there are losers. First, there are all the rural transportation authorities listed: Gunnison Valley, Roaring Fork, San Miguel. The majority of people that take those buses are hard-working people, often going to their second or third job of the day. Why? Because wages are so low, and they live so far away from where the jobs are. These transportation authorities were first started to help working people. But the chambers in all these districts, the chambers of commerce, strongly support them and strongly support a yes vote on this bill. Why? They need employees. But they also need a sense of community. When people have to live far from their jobs, this transit system is the only way they are incorporated as full members into communities. That's what regional transportation authorities, and by the way, special districts, are about. So this is about much more than just budgets or dollars. It is about the quality of life in these communities. It is about helping to some extent to level a rigged playing field where regular working people can't afford the necessities of life. It is about, yes, your bootstraps. These people don't have boots. How in heaven's name could they have bootstraps? These buses are their bootstraps. They're their bootstraps to work. But it's not just transportation we're talking about here. No, no, no. Look down the list again. The Summit County Housing Authority. Who do you suppose is served by that housing authority when it builds affordable apartments, affordable condos? It's working people. It's nurses. It's police officers. It's sheriff's deputies. And yes, it's teachers. The very people that you need to have a real community. Those are the people who are hurt by a no vote on this bill in Summit County. We're talking about a roof over their head. Well, what about the Montezuma Hospital District? Surely they're going to get enough money to take care of things. Don't hold your breath. You'll turn blue and you'll need a hospital. The Montezuma County Hospital District is one of the most rural places you could imagine. I invite you to go down there. It's near the New Mexico border. Every penny that this special district has in their budget is carefully discussed, and it is used. It is used to help people every single day. That's what a special district does. That's why we have them. They're not special interests. They're special districts because of Title 32. It's part of our Colorado Revised Statute. They have no relation whatsoever to special interests. Indeed, they serve the interests of the people, the working people of our state who need a roof over their head, who need a transportation authority, who need a hospital. Then we move to Edwards. I represent Edwards. You might think when you drive past Edwards it's a town. Oh no, it's a special district. The whole area, which acts, quacks like a town, is actually a special district. So by cutting their money, they have no other source. They don't have town property taxes because they're not a town. They're a special district. And by the way, there are many areas in rural Colorado, in my district, that are not towns. They're special districts. They're not listed here, but they could be next. A no vote on this bill is an assault on rural Western Colorado. It is an assault on people who work hard every single day. Our teachers, our police officers, our nurses, our maids, our restaurant people. It is an assault on the services that help them every single day. Please, I beg of you, vote yes to correct this mistake. We made the mistake. It is our responsibility as representatives of the people to correct it. Thank you.
Assistant Minority West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, one of the things I love about this institution is that we are a citizen legislature. There are things that all of us do when the clock strikes 12 and we all return to our districts to resume our lives and our careers. And for me, that means that I represent clients and come up with creative solutions to try to fix their problems. As a legislator, my duties are similar, and yet they're different, because I took an oath to uphold the Constitution of this state. Now, I do agree with my colleague from Aurora that our actions have consequences. The way we draft bills, the way we present bills, yes, they have consequences. And are we as a body immune from making mistakes? No, we are not. We're human. We will make mistakes. We'll continue to make mistakes. And yes, I agree with my colleagues that we have an obligation to fix those mistakes. But our failure to comply with the Constitution also has consequences. We've heard a lot about how this is a simple fix. I would suggest to you that a simple fix is in the eye of the beholder. Now, there is a way to fix this, And I think my colleague from Littleton raised some good points regarding the scope of the call for this special session and how that may have limited our options. It doesn't limit our ability to use creative solutions to fix this problem going forward. But unfortunately, we are where we are today. So I'd encourage you to consider the precedent that you are setting. How many small mistakes, how many simple fixes will trigger a discussion like today's, where we are being encouraged to choose political expediency over constitutional adherence? My colleague from Steamboat Springs talked about the fiscal note, and I'd like you to look at the fiscal note as well, because in the summary it talks about how the special district taxes were suspended. Colleagues, these taxes were not suspended. They were repealed. We are being asked to reinstate those taxes. We need to be transparent and honest in our language with the citizens of this state. And there is no simple mistake exception to Tabor. Now, all of us may not like the Constitution in its entirety, but we all took an oath to defend the Constitution in its entirety. Robert Frost, in one of my favorite poems, talks about the fork in the road, choosing the path that you will take. So colleagues, this is not our only opportunity to be at that fork in the road. But today I ask you, as we look at the path of political expediency versus the path of adherence to the Constitution, let us take the road less traveled by. That will make all the difference. Thank you, members.
Representative Harrod.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I sat in Finance Committee yesterday as we discussed this important piece of legislation. And after hearing from RTD and the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District, it became even more important to me that we address this concern and that we address it now. I would like to speak specifically to the constituents and the Scientific and Cultural Facilities in House District 8 for a second. The facilities that we all utilize, love, and care about. The ones that are shining examples of who we are as Coloradans. Some of the ones that you might know and I'm sure have visited include the Denver Botanic Gardens, the Colorado Museum of Nature and Science, the Denver Zoo. A lot of ones that we also utilize, but folks might not realize, are also funded by SCFD, are places like the Lighthouse Writers Organization, Cleo Parker Robinson Dance, the Colorado Film Society, the Denver Urban Gardens, the Black Arts Festival, and even places that I had not visited yet but plan to, which include the Firefighters Museum and so many others. These cultural facilities are part of who we are as Colorado and make Denver and the rest of our state a place that people want to come, to visit, to bring their children and their families to enjoy the life that is ours. And I, for one, am very proud of these institutions. We heard yesterday from RTD. They stated very clearly that this problem, this inadvertent problem that we created is going to have an impact on 4,500 to 5,000 writers. Those are real people. Beyond just the millions of school children that are coming to our cultural facilities that will also be impacted by this mistake that we created, we will also have this impact on the senior citizen, the disabled person, the young person who is simply trying to get to school, because we are going to have that impact and those cuts on services and possibly even an increase in fares to those who already can't afford it. Members, I will say that while I've listened to the debates on both sides of the aisle, that there is one fact that I think we can all agree on, and that is that we are here today. Regardless of if we feel like we should be waiting until January or another time to address this issue, the governor has called us here today. We are sitting in our seats, we have our buttons at our fingertips, and we have the ability to fix our mistake today, right now. We have already cost the taxpayers dollars by being here today, and to not act because we don't feel like we should, we don't feel like it's the right time, is completely irresponsible. But beyond that, I have heard arguments that not only will we vote on it maybe next year, but not right now, that we agree that this was a mistake that we made, and yes, that we should fix it. I've also heard that we should actually take this to a vote of the people, that we should not make these decisions here in the legislature. And I will remind you once again, as one of my colleagues already pointed out, that we have already taken these issues to the vote of the people. The people have already voted to support these special districts. Let me just remind you, 1917 RTD was passed, 1995 RTD was passed, 1999 RTD was passed with a 65.6% vote, and 2004 RTD referendum 4A was also passed. SCFD was passed first in 1988, then again in 1994. In 1995 it was passed, in 2004 it was passed, and just recently in 2016 the people of the Science and Cultural Facilities District voted once again for SCFD to remain active, alive, and to, yes, support those kids who just walked in the balcony to go to all of the cultural facilities that they so love, I'm sure. That was approved by a 62.9% vote. I also want to remind you that not only did we pass these ballot initiatives, that these ballot initiatives also cost the people of Colorado money. Just recently, SCFD had to pay almost $1 million simply to hold that election. So now, not only are we wasting taxpayer dollars by sitting here and saying we refuse to vote when we've already been called, we are also not allowing these districts to collect revenue because of a mistake that we made, again, costing money. But now we're asking them to go back to a vote of the people and cost the people more money? More money, while we are also cutting services to those who need it. That is irresponsible, members. We cannot do that. And finally, one of my favorite arguments is that there were simple fixes that simply weren't considered, that there were other ideas of how to address this issue. Members, I will remind you that we all have the ability to introduce legislation before this body. We all have the ability to debate and to amend pieces of legislation before this body. I did not see another proposal brought forward to this body, nor in committee did we hear a single amendment to the bill that was brought forward by our majority leader. Members, if you have a different solution to fix this problem that will not impact the 5,000 writers and the millions of kids who visit these facilities every day, and I did not mention the people who are in our hospitals in rural Colorado right now, then bring those ideas forward. I'm happy to have that conversation with you, and I want to have that conversation with you. But if you did not bring those ideas forward, you do not have the ability to stand up here and say, well, we have other ideas that were just simply not considered. Members, we are here today. We must do what's responsible. We must vote for this bill, and we must stop the bleeding that's already being incurred by our special districts. Thank you.
Minority Leader Neville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, if there's a glitch that we need to fix, it's the fact that we need to stop using Washington-style budgets. Let me explain. If you look at RTD's adopted budget, in 2017, they are going to get $36 million more in sales tax revenue than they got in 2016. So let's take a look at the fiscal note, and I'll even double it. Say that because of the mistake that was made, they get $8 million less. They still end up with $28 million more in revenue. So we're calling $28 million more revenue a cut. If there's a mistake that we need to fix, it's that we need to stop these doomsday predictions of what's going on. Earlier, I think I was accused of being a strict interpreter of the Constitution. I will gladly wear that title on my sleeve all day long, because the Constitution does not have a price tag, because no price can compare to those who fought for it. I urge a no vote on this.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, colleagues, for your attentiveness during this debate that we're having here. I was one of those who voted for 267, much to the chagrin of some of my colleagues on the right, but because of some of the things that were in it, and I refer to 267 as the casserole bill, because there's just a whole lot of everything in it. And maybe a lesson that my dad taught me many years ago: when you look at something like a casserole, it's not what it is, it's what it was. And if you look at what was in this bill, if we'd looked at what it was, we wouldn't have gotten in the bind that we're in today. I wish that I could say that I voted for 267 because it lowered taxes. I mean, when I go and talk to my people, they say, "You lowered taxes. That's a bonus. You guys don't do that too often." I say, "Well, that's true, but we kind of created a problem in doing that." So I would really like to say that I voted for it because it reduced taxes, but it couldn't do it. As Representative Pabon said, we just missed it on what was in there. What we did not miss in that bill, however, was the hospital provider fee, the financial assistance of rural schools, $1.8 billion for transportation. The list goes on and on. That's why I refer to it as a casserole. On May 30th, Senate Bill 267 was signed into law. Into law. So no matter what it was before, it now is what it is. And that's what was placed on our table, was that casserole. By law, the 2.9% was repealed, ended, terminated. Don't get me wrong, I feel for the red pandas. I feel for the Republican Transportation Democrat, or whatever RTD stands for. It's been bandied around enough I've forgotten now. I feel for all the cultural facilities. Seriously, I do. Because we messed up and put them in a bind. I understand that. However, I feel more strongly for Article 10, Section 20, Paragraph 4 of the Constitution of the State of Colorado. I personally would love to see the 2.9% reinstated. There's got to be a way that we can do that, because we didn't think about it. And now we're debating, well, whether or not they can survive without it and whether the rules can survive without it. We wouldn't have had this debate if we would have checked the ingredients before. This is the first time in 5 years that I've ever seen a bill go through that such an important thing was overlooked by everybody. I don't know how that happened. Could have something to do with a lot of important legislation that gets shoved through in the last 2 weeks of the session instead of talking about it from the first 2 weeks, but that's just a footnote to that. I do not want to reinstate that 2.9% by maneuvering around Article 10, Section 20, Paragraph 4. I want to see us do it through the Constitution. I am a rural advocate. Surprise, that's no surprise to any of you that have been around here. I am a rural advocate. But first and foremost, I want to point out that I am only a rural advocate because of what the Constitution allows me to do, both at the state and federal level. And I can tell you, in my career, I've made enough mistakes in my life to kind of be an expert on fixing them. Whether that be growing up, I made a lot of them as a kid. That was one of the things that I always was amazed when my brother and I would overhaul an engine, whether that be on a lawnmower or a motorcycle or whatever, and we'd end up with parts left over. That didn't work out well. or as an educator in the classroom, when I would assume that a student had studied for the test and had prepared for the test, and he flunked the test, and I couldn't figure out why until I asked him. He said, "Mr. Wilson, I sat up outside my mother's door to keep my dad from beating her last night." Mistakes, mistakes. Or as a superintendent, making assumptions. One thing I did learn in that is when I rapidly tried to correct the first mistake I made, I tended to make another one. This oversight can be corrected, but let's not make another mistake. Let's not skirt the Constitution in order to do it. But Rep. Wilson, we have opinions supporting our position. Folks, opinions are just like behinds. We've all got them. Let's not put our behinds in a bind with someone else's opinion. Let's fix this the right way. This bill is not the way to do it. Thank you.
Representative Gray.
Thank you, Madam. Excuse me, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, this is actually what I do for a living, and on most days, the circle of us who want to sit around and talk about the minutia of Tabor is about a half a dozen, and so this is a big spotlight for public finance law, where there's not normally that many of us. Tabor's been interpreted for a really long time. We've been doing it since 1992, since it was passed. And when the courts have looked at it, they were said pretty early in 1995 that the courts were going to decline to take a rigid interpretation of Tabor that would serve to result in a decrease in government services. Now, Colorado Supreme Court is not the only body that gets to have an opinion on what Tabor means. And we as legislators can choose to interpret it differently. But everybody who's here, no matter how you vote on this bill, is not violating their oath to uphold the Constitution. You can vote no on this bill and uphold your vote to uphold the Constitution. You can vote yes on this bill and uphold your oath to withhold the Constitution. There's not a constitutional prerogative either way on this. You can use your own interpretation if you want to, but it's absolutely everybody who votes yes or no will be voting to uphold the Constitution. And there's plenty of support for that. And I think that one of the things that gets lost a little bit about it too is what's particularly unfortunate about things like RTD and SCFD is this is a relatively small portion of their budget. That's absolutely true. Nobody's saying that RTD is going to close down or anything close to it. What is unfortunate though is that if it's your bus route that gets cut, it's 100% of the way that you get to work. It might be 0.1% of RTD. Most customers aren't going to be the ones who lose that. Most customers are going to keep their route. But if it's your route, it's 100% of them. And so that part of it is particularly unfortunate. It's an all or nothing thing. It's not just it'd be one thing if every bus was going to go a half a mile an hour slower, but that's not how these things happen. It's all or nothing. And so some people are going to wind up losing their way to work. And that part of it is unfortunate. But I'll also say, what I also think is unfortunate is this original piece of legislation, there was a process that we used where everybody was, not everybody, but it was a bipartisan process where we worked together, we came up with a compromise, and the vast majority of this body got something behind something that they could support. And I think it's unfortunate that we couldn't get that done this time. That the way the special session has happened is the other way that we do things sometimes, which is we have a lot of arguments, but don't really necessarily produce any results. And so I would say my encouragement to all of us, now once we all go back to our jobs or the other things that we're doing, is hopefully get our heads on right and come back in January acting more like the way we did on the first bill, making tough compromises, sitting down and consulting with each other, and getting some more bipartisan achievements versus some of the other things we do where we don't really find common ground to cooperate. So thank you so much.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members, for the rigorous debate here. I agree with Representative Leonard that this is not a waste of time for us to sit and debate this issue. It matters. Tabor is something that fundamentally affects Coloradans all over the place in many multiple ways. We all know why we're here. There was an inadvertent mistake in Senate Bill 267, something no one caught, something we looked to correct administratively first. But the fix-it bill that we've come up with is something that has broad support from organizations across the state and across the political spectrum, as we saw during the testimony in the Finance Committee. But this broadly supported bill has gotten caught up in a Tabor snag. And I know there are organizations that want us to hold to some single narrow purity test on Tabor, but the truth is that an unbending interpretation doesn't serve Tabor well. It doesn't serve the people of Colorado well. It doesn't square with how the courts have interpreted Tabor. We all know that, having served in this chamber and being the students of politics that we are, that the Constitution, state or federal, isn't self-defining. These terms are not defined in the Constitution. So courts over thousands of cases have told us what the Constitution, what different provisions of the Constitution mean. They do that based on precedent. They do it based on the facts of a particular case. They use canons of statutory construction and context to develop methods to read and interpret the law. Here, Tabor says districts, and I'm quoting, must have voter approval in advance for any new tax or tax policy change directly causing a net tax revenue gain. So let's talk about that. Let's strictly construe this. Let's adhere to the most strict construction. Is this a new tax? Nope. Voters have approved it multiple times. We certainly did not intend to override votes here. Our mistake doesn't take away the fact that voters approved these taxes. This is not a new tax. So is it a tax policy change causing a net tax revenue gain? Well, Tabor talks about fiscal year spending. And given that the special districts have already lost about 3 months of revenue, and as Representative Neville pointed out, they actually see an increase. No, removing this exemption and reinstating the tax would not cause a net tax revenue gain from last year. I also don't think it's a tax policy change. How can this be called a tax policy change when all we want to do is turn back to the policy we never meant to do away with to begin with? So it just doesn't fit under the strictest interpretation of Tabor. Case law tells us that Tabor has to be read in a, quote, workable manner. That's what the courts who are charged to interpret Tabor have said. It tells us that Tabor must be read giving it the popular meaning usually understood by the voters. When Tabor becomes irrational or unworkable, it doesn't meet the goal of voters who wanted to make sure the legislature wasn't increasing taxes without their support and wanted to make sure that government would use resources efficiently. That was the goal of the people who voted for Tabor. So tell me, how does saying that an exemption mistakenly made less than a year after it was passed in the case of SCFD affect the will of the voters? How does saying this, that this can't be reinstated, tell people that we are running government efficiently or that we are not getting their approval before getting a tax? Because that was done. We are not affecting the will of the voters here, those who supported Tabor. One of the foremost experts, as Representative Pabon already pointed out, one of the foremost experts on the Colorado Constitution, Professor Richard Collins, testified yesterday that reading Tabor to require a vote in this situation is simply an illogical reading of Tabor that doesn't square with Colorado case law or any other reasonable and alternative reading of Tabor. If you want to stay true to Tabor, stay true to what voters intended with Tabor, which was to exercise reasonable restraint over legislators who might unduly raise taxes against their will. That doesn't mean you have to cast a no vote here. So that's my Tabor argument, but the broader thing for me now at this point is I think it's important to affect the will of the people of Colorado by being bipartisan and working together to solve problems. There's a lot that's upsetting in the news today, Las Vegas, Tom Petty. I'm a little bit heartened to know that hashtag Republicans hate red pandas might soon be trending, but after Rep. Rosenthal's speech. But ultimately, I think that's what voters want. They want to be checked in by before approving taxes, and they got this here. And they want people to work together. And we've been proposing a variety of solutions. How can we find the common ground? How can we find the win-win? I think we've offered a few ideas. But we don't have willing partners right now. And that makes me really sad. I don't think when people passed Tabor, they meant to tie the hands of legislators in a way that would prevent legislators from fixing a mistake that overrode, when that mistake overrode the will of the voters. That's not what Tabor does. No reasonable interpretation says the legislature gets to override the will of the voters mistakenly and then can't fix it. Because people keep saying, I don't see the oops clause in Tabor. I don't see that clause either. That ain't in there. We have a responsibility, and if you want to honor Tabor, I think that means a yes vote on this bill. I ask for a yes vote.
Seeing no further discussion, the motion before us is a passage of HB 1001 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Please close the machine. With 37 yes votes, 25 no votes, and 3 excused, House Bill 1001 is passed. Co-sponsors for the Red Pandas. Please close the machine. All right, with that, we're going to go ahead and hold off on doing introduction of resolutions for CNADA so that the Senate can review this bill, and we can handle those later. So announcements and introductions. Madam Majority Leader Becker, announcements and introductions. Representative Melton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. If I can just get your attention, do not leave the building or the complex in case we do need to return in order to do the resolution. So please check in with your leadership throughout the day, but do not leave and go home. Thanks.
Thank you for that clarification. Representative Willett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I don't know if you heard on the radio, there's going to be a debate this Friday on the cost to society of legalization of marijuana. And I think it's going to be pretty fascinating. It's hosted by the Centennial Institute, but hold your booze. They're going to have a debate with one of the leading attorneys pro-marijuana. So I think it's worth all our time to go down this Friday the 6th at Colorado Christian University and listen to this debate on not only societal costs but economic costs of legalization of marijuana versus the benefits, which, by the way, we had an interim committee on that Representative Pabon and I got through and tried to start the study on this. It's important to all of us. Thank you.
Representative Singer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm just glad I'm not the one talking about marijuana at the well. We would all be remiss as a body if we did not congratulate our Colorado Rockies for making the playoffs. They play tomorrow night. And I know the well wishes of the State House of Representatives are with them as they move on to the World Series.
Any further announcements or introductions? Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm amazed with a special session how many announcements there are. It's like, well, what if we weren't meeting today? All these announcements would go unmade. Anyway, I move the House stand in recess until later in the day. We will wait to hear what action is taken by the Senate. If the bill passes the Senate, we will adjourn for the day. If not, we will need to move for a call of the House to pass CNADA resolutions and adjourn. So on our side, I think our whip will stay in touch with folks. Republicans, I don't know how you guys will stay in touch with your folks. But at some point, there's likely to be a call of the House to come back today. And with that, the House will stand in recess until later in the day.
Seeing no objection, the House will stand in recess until later in the day.
Representative Pabon wants to wear purple tomorrow for the last day. What do you guys think?
Wishful thinking, wishful thinking. Members, also just a quick announcement, per diem and transportation green sheets have been placed on your desk. Please complete and turn them in at the front desk.